Golden Gauntlet qualifier number 1 starts tonight. Deck lists are locked as I'm recording this video. I have the inside scoop on what some of the best players in the world are bringing to this tournament. Let's take a look at what top players are taking to Golden Gauntlet qualifier number 1. Starting with the reigning champion, Rorum is bringing one of the most intriguing piles of cards I have ever seen. There are so many things going on here, but I think at baseline, it's worth focusing on the fundamentals here. This is a Kate Bishop Merlin Werewolf deck. That's the primary points angle here. This is a Juggernaut deck. That's the primary disruption / seal the game window here. And there are, of course, other powerful interactive tools happening in this list. We have Hood Misery, we have Cannonball Mercury. This list looks like a bit of a greatest hits list, to be honest with you. All of the packages that have dominated the metagame at various points in the past are coming together and combining their powers into this like a Megazord. The Misery Hood package combines with the Cannonball Mercury package, combines with the Merlin Werewolf package. We also have the other wolf, a Fenris Wolf in here, which goes with our Killmonger, which goes with our Cannonball Mercury. There is Juggernaut, because Juggernaut is basically a package unto himself, and Red Guardian covering the confusing situations that can arise when you have such flexibility in the amount of points you're able to allocate and where you're able to allocate them. Sometimes you just need a catch-all tech card rather than a more specific one, like Shang-Chi or Enchantress. That means that this deck actually reminds me the most of the Agamoto version of Annihilus that Honifer took to the previous Golden Gauntlet tournament. And I know Honifer and Rorum are friends and maybe they're testing partners and they interact fairly frequently, so I do wonder how much inspiration came from that. This is a notably powerful deck that is looking at mostly being a deck that has powerful reactive options into opponents whose game plans are more predictable. Things like Invisible Woman First Steps can get pressured by what this deck does, but also fundamentally playing a much more fair game plan in the sense that it is not going to rely on drawing one specific card, but rather, in most games, this will be able to output meaningful amounts of points in a really powerful way. A solid, perhaps the mid-rangiest mid-range deck of all time. The one card in it that confuses me a little bit is the Lady Deathstrike. Lady Deathstrike just seems like a card that is there to do a pseudo Red Guardian kind of job, but I feel like she has less targets than I would be super comfortable with. I do like that you can use her to brick maybe a Prodigy turn at some point if there is something Deathstrikeable in, say, the second slot. I like that you can use her to eat Havocs. I like that you can use her to eat Thenas some of the time. I think that's largely what she's aimed at here, but that is pretty conditional. And so this makes sense for a player who was obviously good enough to win the previous iteration of this tournament to take a deck like this, where there are these conditional answers to powerful things. Both Red Guardian and Lady Deathstrike conditionally very good against an Invisible Woman First Steps. Juggernaut is just straightforwardly very good against that deck because it is able to manipulate where the points go on the final turn of the game. So I think that this looks like a solid mid-range deck with genuine plans for a powerful matchup. We started with one champion. Let's talk about the other champion. This is the build that Derek is bringing, and I do happen to know that he did actually contemplate bringing Bounce before realizing that it would simply get obliterated by the card Supergiant. This is Derek's Victoria Hand Moon Girl list that he's been effectively tuning and playing for about a month now. He never bought into the Invisible Woman craze, as it were. He has always trusted Victoria Hand and Tech as a more powerful, more unique, and more straightforward attempt at dealing with what this metagame is set to send your way. And I think that largely a lot of his reason for doing that is that he is able to play in a very highly competent manner where a lot of other players may struggle to estimate the total points. Derek is much easier, or it is much easier for someone like Derek to understand what the point allocation of these decks really looks like and play against it in a relatively fair way. Of course, Victoria Hand is the biggest part of that. Being able to be a deck that can similarly output points to Invisible Woman First Steps is pretty key to trying to actually beat it. The way I look look at Invisible Win First Steps deck is it's sort of like if you could fuse discard into a package of cards that actually had a similar game plan to a normal mid-range deck. It's like if discard was able to interact with you. And so this deck is saying, you know, some of the time I'll have better interaction, some of the time I'll have better points, and either way, I'm going to be able to play real games of Marvel Snap against basically anything. Now, one of the things that you will notice, though, is that the ways in which these cards are so powerful, or these decks are built with Invisible Win First Steps and her archetype in mind, has cost them the 4-cost tech cards, which is a really interesting dynamic. Because those tech cards are so bad against Invisible Win First Steps, I think we might genuinely see an all-time low of cards like Shang-Chi and Enchantress, and that is definitely something you'll notice as a trend as we go through this video. Fresh off of a top 4 in the previous Golden Gauntlet, Honifer is bringing an Invisible Win First Steps deck that is looking to beat pretty specifically the Supergiant deck. And he's been championing this deck very, very, very consistently. The idea here is that with your own Juggernaut and your own Cosmo, you will be far less vulnerable to all the BS that a Supergiant deck is able to put you through. It is worse in most other matchups that you can reasonably play, but it does meaningfully alter the way in which that matchup works. There are going to be plenty of situations where doing what this where this deck allows you to play downhill against a Supergiant deck in a way that very few other decks can. There are a lot of Supergiant decks that are looking to hide things like a Shadow King. A Cosmo is a great answer to stuff like that, protecting your guys. A Juggernaut is a great answer to stuff like that, protecting your guys. I do not know if this is a worthwhile trade-off, and I'm really fascinated to see what happens, because I think you could reasonably look at this deck and say, you are over-teching for the one bad matchup, you are looking at the one bad matchup that you really don't want to see, and you're building your deck to beat that. But I think if that's what you're worried about, you should just be playing a different deck in the first place, and I think maybe you're supposed to be all-inning on being an Invisible Win First Steps deck, even if she has the target on her back that she does. I'm really interested to see how this goes, because there are two ways that this could go, and I think it could be either incredibly successful or like marginally unsuccessful, in that it could take a deck that has a dominant metagame position and does a lot of powerful stuff and dilute it down such that you are now losing other matchups that you would be winning for free a lot of the time. And I think that's a reasonable choice for a high skill player to make, and I think that is the choice that was made here. Speaking of Supergiant, this is what Gamer has been playing. Gamer is a bit of a Supergiant merchant at this point. One of the things he was messing around with in this list was using a Wasp in order to play it alongside a Cannonball on that Supergiant turn to trick people into thinking that it wasn't a Cannonball. That's a cool strategy on ladder, but it looks like he decided that it doesn't actually make sense in a tournament where people know the Wasp exists, and that trick is sort of a one-time only kind of gag. I think that this is a really odd Supergiant list, and the reason it's so odd to me is that it's taking the beef that would typically be located in a 5-drop, and it's saying, we don't have that. It's just Cannonball. We're not doing Ronin, we're not doing Maximus, we're doing Cannonball, we're doing Fenris Wolf, we're doing Gladiator, and we're doing Copycat, and that is where the points come from. And I think that this is a really, this is a potential like genuine evolution, because it's possible that the necessity or the perceived necessity of having those numbers in the deck is something that could have been holding this deck back. I don't think it's a coincidence that this is kind of the only deck that plays Ronin, and like, maybe it just means that this deck shouldn't be playing Ronin. I think it's very reasonable to look at a deck like Supergiant and be like, I get why you can play Ronin, but I don't think it's the best thing to be doing. And I think that's sort of the thinking here, where it's like, all right, what if instead of the card that no other deck plays because it's terrible, we played a bunch of cards that were really, really good? And so this is a sort of card quality build of Supergiant that I think is really interesting, because it loses maybe some absolute point output, but it gains a lot of flexibility because its power is now located on 3s, so you're able to like do power plus interaction on the final turn of the game. And it also just doesn't run anything terrible anymore, and I do think there is value in that. One of the really interesting dynamics in my high elo chat room is that a lot of players who were playing in this tournament were strongly considering taking Agamoto decks to it. And I don't think you would have known that if you were just sort of keeping up with like the meta or watching videos or watching streams or whatever. But there was a pretty high level of interest in Agamoto here. And one person actually did take it. That person, of course, being Butt, our general merchant of confusing BS. That is what he does. And this is definitely a deck that has a lot of confusing BS in it. I just think that a lot of the advantage that a player like Butt has is the advantage of a pig in shit, where he is experienced with his specific brand of you don't know what's happening here, and you don't know what's happening here. You're not experienced with that brand. And I think this deck is very much a I am weaponizing surprise. I mean, you can see the Hulkling in there. Our boy is back. And so this, fresh off the top 4 at the first Golden Gauntlet, but was unable to participate in the second Golden Gauntlet because actually he got married. Congratulations to Butt. But this does mean that he is back with a vengeance for this one. His Hulkling is back with a vengeance for this one, and I really think people are underestimating Agamoto. I really cannot stress this enough. Like, a lot of the conversations I had were people talking like, all right, I'm either going to take V-Hand, I'm going to take Invisible Woman, or I'm going to take Agamoto. I'm either going to take Invisible Woman, or I'm going to take Supergiant, or I'm going to take Agamoto. Like, he was very much in those conversations with these extremely meta decks, and I'm really excited to see what Butt can do with them. And frankly, this looks like the most fun deck that anyone has brought to a tournament like this. Like, this looks awesome. I'm going to play a ton of this. I can't wait. Thank God they finally released a King Atri variant. With 1 minute left, Butt asked me and Derek which of his decks to submit. Both of us told him to take Agamoto instead of this, but I do feel like people should know that this deck almost got brought to Golden Gauntlet. This is, of course, the classic Butt deck, the combo. The idea is you M'Baku and you have your Blink M'Baku. The reason we don't want to do this right now is because even though, I mean, like, bluntly, I've played with Stardust and I put her in my Sarah Tech deck, and I realized very quickly I would rather have Enchantress pretty much straight on. But Stardust is a new card, and when there's a new card coming out, there's just always pretty much a risk of a new card showing up and just doing some really dominant stuff. Or not necessarily dominant, just being overplayed, showing up a lot. And this deck does actually kind of get countered by Stardust, and it definitely gets countered by Killmonger. And I expect to see, if not a bunch of Stardust, more than she deserves. And if not a bunch of Killmonger, a lot of Killmonger. Like, I do expect a pretty decent amount of Killmonger in a metagame like this. And so that is largely the reason why we suggested the Agamoto deck over this. But I do want people to know that literally a minute before decklist time, this was very much in contention for one of the best players in the world to bring. That conversation led to W posting his deck. I don't know how many people remember W, the former Wobolos, the original, probably the guy who got Dr. Doom nerfed, if anyone remembers that. The guy who got, like, Professor X maybe nerfed, I think is an argument there too. Like, this is an OG deck builder in Marvel Snap, and he has brought what I consider to be the apex of random bullshit Go decks. And it actually came up in the context of me telling Butt to take the Agamoto deck because it was his sort of asymmetric information weaponization merchant thing that he does. And W was like, you want to see some asymmetric information? Check this out. Nobody will have any clue what's happening in my games. I am going to weaponize the asymmetric nature of the fact that I know what all my cards are. They have no idea what my cards are. This is like, I don't know the right way to phrase this, so I'm just going to say it. This is like a whole deck. If a whole deck was Hulkling, like that's what's happening here. The amount of asymmetric possibilities here are incredible. But there is a reason why this isn't a meta deck right now, and it's you know, a little bit of a confusing lift. There's a Wiccan in here with the 1-drop build, which means that the power level can be a little bit low because the 1-drops are taking up so much space in deck building. One of the reasons that Quicksilver has overtaken normal 1-drops as a methodology for Wiccan is not just that you want to play a one-on-one all the time. That's a big part of it, but that's not really all of it. It's that it frees up your deck to run more powerful cards so you can use that energy better. And this deck is like, okay, forget all that. What we're going to do is Wiccan is like an add-on, and we're just going to generate a bunch of cards, and we're going to cheat energy somehow. Loki, we're going to cheat energy with that. Quinjet. We're going to cheat energy with that. We're not like obsessed with getting to Wiccan. He's just there because he's cool. And the rest of what's happening is we are going to generate cards that our opponent will not know how to play around. And that is a very good strategy in a tournament. You can go all the way back to the first Creator Clash where Agent Coulson was an all-star. Just adding in an open decklist tournament, the fact that things are going to be randomly generated and you have to play around those to the pool is extremely, extremely powerful. And that's what this deck is based around. All right, y'all. Thank you so much for watching. As always, I have been KMBest. You have been phenomenal, and I'm going to be giving away a season pass sponsored by the Golden Gauntlet to anyone who comments, "I have been phenomenal" on this video. And I left this to the end, so enjoy that. I wanted to make sure only the people who actually watched the video to the end got their chance at the season pass, but I am going to be giving away a season pass to anyone who comments on this video, "I have been phenomenal," or "You have been phenomenal." I don't want you to call me phenomenal. I want you to call yourself phenomenal. We're doing self-affirmations here. Thank you so much. I've been KMBest. You have been phenomenal. And I will see you in the Golden Gauntlet. Make sure you check it out on Twitch and YouTube tonight.